the fact of the matter is that the Pakistanis have never really been interested in normal relations with India. Slightly more hardline policy towards Pakistan over the last couple of years, and maybe it's time to change that. I say no, let's double down on this policy, because the current policy of playing hardball with the Pakistanis seems to have resulted in a lot more in India's favor than what has happened in the past. India's advantage while dealing with Pakistan, and we must press home this advantage rather than let Pakistan off the hook by once again re-engaging with them, trying to normalize relations with them, trying to give them some relief from our side, because they are in trouble. If they are in trouble, we should exploit it and not give them some kind of an escape route from this. It was around, it was in the mid-90s. I had just started working on Pakistan, and I went to meet a very senior Indian diplomat in the Foreign Office, South Block. And during the course of the conversation, I'd been already studying Pakistan for a couple of years by then, but during the course of the conversation, I went and, as a young person, naive, but very inquisitive. So I asked the gentleman, I said, "Sir, do we have a policy on Pakistan? Does India have a Pakistan policy?" And I got a dressing down. The gentleman told me, who's a good friend of mine incidentally, I can't name him because I haven't got his permission, but he gave me a dressing down, and he said that he scolded me, and he said, "What do you think? India does not have a policy on Pakistan. Do you think we are some kind of a country without a foreign policy?" And he gave me a big lecture on it. But he didn't tell me what India's policy on Pakistan was. Anyways, the matter, it went away, and nearly 25 years later, we were both walking into a conference, and something had happened. I don't remember exactly what, but in the course of, while we were walking in, the same gentleman tells me that, it is really surprising that after so many years, after decades of dealing with Pakistan, we don't have a policy on Pakistan. I immediately remembered the dressing down I had received, and I just stopped and I looked aghast at him, and I said, "Look, when I asked you this question 25 years earlier, you had scolded me and given me this lecture, and today you are telling me that India doesn't have a Pakistan policy." Now, this person has been there, done that. He's dealt with Pakistan for many, many years. He's supposed to be an expert on Pakistan, and this is what I had to hear from him. Now, the reason I bring this issue up is because just a couple of days back, there was the book launch of the late Ambassador Sati Lamba's book, In Pursuit of Peace, on Indo-Pak relations, and the role he has played, how he dealt with Pakistan through his career, and the back channel diplomacy that he was leading in the early 2000s. I think my own impression after reading the book is that it is very troubling. It is troubling because at least this is what my interpretation of the book is. Other people have, of course, written something entirely different. But my interpretation of the book is that it reveals that how Indian diplomacy has consistently doubled down on failed policies and approaches towards Pakistan. But frankly, it boggles the mind, does India really want a stable, strong Pakistan on its border? And we know that a stable and strong Pakistan is never going to be a friendly Pakistan. That is what the experience of the last more than 7 decades has taught us. Every time Pakistan is prosperous, Pakistan is stable, Pakistan is strong, it has inflicted all kinds of pain on us. Not that the pain has stopped because it's become weak and unstable and poor, but the pain becomes much more manageable when it is the latter than when it is the former. So this shibboleth of a peaceful, strong, stable Pakistan, which we know is never going to be friendly, why has it never been examined? Why does India not have a clear, cogent, coherent policy on Pakistan, especially a country which has caused as much trouble as it has? Over the last 75 years, India has taken all kinds of initiatives to try and have friendly, normal relations with Pakistan. All of these, incidentally, have ended up in dismal failure. Now, if you read Ambassador Lamba's book, he recounts many of these incidents, which he says were in many cases failed opportunities simply because something happened at the last minute. General Zia's plane fell, somebody died, something or the other always happened, and that entire process used to get derailed, and whatever progress was going to be made was stalled, and you were back to square one. Now, the thing is that what boggles the mind is that why India has continued to pursue this path for so many years. There was, of course, a time when there were serious diplomatic and strategic challenges, and India did need to reach out to Pakistan to try and cool things down, to try and manage the affairs. But over the years, at least over the last 20 years or so, I don't think that compulsion has been there any longer, and yet India has continued to persist with the shibboleths, as I call them, of the kind of policy we have made, or what kind of policy we want to make as far as Pakistan is concerned, and we've continued with that, and that doesn't seem to really make sense, because the fact of the matter is that the Pakistanis have never really been interested in normal relations with India. The problem is that the Indian diplomats, however, keep skirting around the issues. The Pakistanis will openly tell us that India is an enemy country. They don't hide this, their sentiments towards India. And yet you will have the Indian diplomats skirt around this issue by distinguishing between the Pakistani establishment or the Pakistani state and the Pakistani people, as though these are two separate entities. When you look at the sentiments being expressed by the Pakistani people, they are no different from the hate-filled sentiments expressed by the Pakistani state, including some of the Pakistani high commissioners who've served in India and who have friends in high places, including in journalists, people who keep interviewing them with bow ties and what have you, and keep batting for the Pakistanis in newspaper columns and in their television interviews. And yet those very same Pakistani diplomats, high commissioners, others feel absolutely no compunctions in actually giving interviews in which they call on jihad against India. And they say that sponsoring jihad against India, there is nothing wrong in it. In fact, it is allowed even under international law, as per them. Very often you will hear Indian politicians who don't know anything about Pakistan actually come out and say, but the Pakistani people are not our enemy, that they are very well disposed towards India. When you ask these politicians or some analysts, what evidence, empirical evidence do they have to make this assertion, they have nothing. They have absolutely nothing to tell you. It's just something which they've conjured up in their own minds, which they vomit out, and they imagine that that's what it is all about. That just because we feel like this, that means the Pakistanis also feel like this about us, which is entirely a fallacious way of reasoning this thing out. We might have some commonalities in terms of language, in terms of cultural and social mores, in terms of food habits, perhaps even in terms of the music we hear. But that's where it all ends. In fact, I or my family or many people I know would have similar cultural, linguistic and other affinities with people in the West. That does not mean that an American is the same as an Indian or a Brit is the same as an Indian. So why do we then imagine in our heads that a Pakistani is the same as an Indian, that the Pakistani thinks like an Indian thinks? I think over the last 75 years, there's a massive gap in how they think and how we think. Let's talk about people-to-people relations. Now, there was a time at the peak, this sometime in the 90s, mid-90s, in fact even much later, India was issuing something like 350,000 visas to Pakistanis every year. 350,000 visas. This was part of the so-called people-to-people initiative. Even today, when relations are as bad as they are, I think a lot of you would be surprised to know that even now, over 30,000 visas are issued to Pakistanis every year. 30,000. You can't keep a tab on all those people who are coming in, and we know that in many cases people have come in on visas and actually disappeared or carried out activities, including terrorist activities in India. I don't even want to go into those cases, but there is of course the case of that infamous Sajid Mir of the 2611 infamy who came on an Indian visa. So we have issued all this. We have had medical treatment to Pakistani kids. We've done all kinds of other things. But somebody needs to tell me, somebody, especially somebody who keeps talking about promoting people-to-people relations, that in the last 30-40 years of this particular policy, what is the achievement of this policy? Have we cultivated a constituency in Pakistan? Has there been any audit of the effectiveness of this people-to-people policy with Pakistan? Is there anything at all which actually merits this thing? And if there isn't any such thing, why do diplomats keep parroting again and again? Either they have run out of ideas, which clearly they have, and they think that, okay, if nothing else, you can't do anything else, might as well go back to this old, old tack of yours, which again, as I said earlier, keep doing the same thing over and over again, the definition of insanity. We have over $100 billion trade with China. I would really want to know how has that worked out for us in terms of our problems with China. Have those problems reduced, or are those problems where they are? Has it stopped the Chinese from being more aggressive against India? Have they stopped encroaching or trying to encroach in Indian territory? Have they stopped their salami slicing approach? Have they stopped their inimical diplomatic behavior towards India? So please tell me, why do we think that if we open up trade with Pakistan, things will change? Nobody gives me a clear answer on this particular tack which they keep recommending. Then of course there is this thing that, okay, fine, because the Pakistanis have expelled the high commissioners and now relations are at the CDA level, maybe we should go back to restoring high commissioners in each other's countries. Now the thing is, I would really be very interested in knowing what will posting a high commissioner do in Pakistan. Perhaps there is in fact a better case to be made in terms of reducing even the CDA level than going in for upgrading it back to the high commissioner level. But these are things which actually need to be discussed, and rather than just giving in to these former diplomats and their prescriptions, I think these questions need to be asked. Now, coming back to Ambassador Lamba's book, he does give a bird's eye view on, in fact, an insider's perspective on the back channel diplomacy between him and his Pakistani counterparts between 2004 and 2007, and he has been involved in this diplomacy even subsequently. And many people seem to think that this was an ideal period. This was a time when a massive breakthrough was going to be made between India and Pakistan. That the Kashmir issue, the so-called mother of all problems, the core issue, as per the Pakistanis, was going to be resolved between India and Pakistan. But I must reveal a conversation which I had with Ambassador Lamba many years back. And I asked him, I said, sir, please tell me that from whatever we have heard, he didn't reveal anything to me at that time, but everything was there in the public domain, a four-point solution which was being advocated. And I asked him, I said, sir, please tell me, from whatever I have understood of this, this is not a final solution. This is only a temporary solution. And you think, and the idea is that, after about 15 or 20 years, we will finally re-examine this whole issue and see where we want to go from here. Which means that you are not closing this issue, you are not sealing this deal, but you are keeping it open-ended. And he agreed to that. And he said, but you don't understand that once you have spent 15 or 20 years in this particular thing, everything will work out and nobody will want to go back to the bad old days. And frankly, I think that was a naivety of the worst kind, especially when you are dealing with a country like Pakistan, which sees a conflict with India not in terms of two states having a dispute. They see conflict with India in civilizational terms. And if we were going to keep something like this open-ended, and we were going to then open up Kashmir and all sorts of traffic was going to come in, we would have lost Kashmir. So thank God, and we must thank the Pakistanis who sabotaged that particular initiative, which included the Pakistani army, General Kiani and others who sabotaged it. The lawyers movement and all the other stuff which happened in Pakistan. I don't want to go into the details on that particular aspect, but I think the best thing which happened to India was that four-part formula was jettisoned. It's history for the moment. Now, it's one thing to keep lines of communication open, but it is another thing to then start wanting to normalize relations with a country which is not actually ready to normalize with you. And there is absolutely no evidence, no sign whatsoever, nothing, not a single thing that the Pakistanis have done which would lead any Indian to believe that they are ready to improve relations with India. And I think recognizing this is very important. Finally, I think what India needs is a policy on Pakistan, a policy which does not change with seasons, does not change with election cycles, and does not change with governments. A policy, a national policy on Pakistan, which is not going to change simply because somebody gets an idea in his mind, and most prime ministers do, that they will be able to change the trajectory of relations with Pakistan, and invariably they find out that that's not going to happen. So I think we need a very clear policy. We need to stick to that policy for as long as it takes for that policy to work out. I sense a kind of diplomatic fatigue among the retired diplomats, and I don't know what they are being so fatigued about since they are not working anymore on these issues. But I see a sense of fatigue developing that, okay, fine, we've tried this policy, a slightly more hardline policy towards Pakistan over the last couple of years, and maybe it's time to change tack. I say no, let's double down on this policy, because the current policy of playing hardball with the Pakistanis seems to have resulted in a lot more in India's favor than what has happened in the past. And as of now, it is in India's advantage while dealing with Pakistan, and we must press home this advantage rather than let Pakistan off the hook by once again re-engaging with them, trying to normalize relations with them, trying to give them some relief from our side, because they are in trouble. If they are in trouble, we should exploit it and not give them some kind of an escape route from this. We should maximize the advantage we have rather than once again falling back for those old shibboleths of ours. So I would be of the view that India needs to have a very clear, cogent policy on Pakistan, which unfortunately we have not had even after 75 years.